Hello and welcome to another Hand Drink Solo wine info video where we review curious wines for curious minds. And today's wine is particularly curious. In fact, it kind of messed with my head a little bit. Not necessarily because I found it confusing, but rather because it forced me to rethink the way that I talk about wines. Because historically, I've often used terms like tidy or neat or coherent or integrated, and I usually mean that as a compliment when I'm referring to a particular wine. But as I was drinking today's wine, and it was unfolding on my palate in a particularly unruly fashion, it occurred to me that perhaps that is not the highest praise one can give. And if we use music as an analogy, if you're thinking about pop music, for example, now when you're writing a pop song that needs to be immediately likable and accessible and inviting to the broad public, then it definitely has to be neat. It must be tidy and, dare I say, carefully constructed. You have to make sure there's not too many hooks or too much flair or too many ideas which can distract people. But if you are sitting writing Bohemian Rhapsody or Paranoid Android or Day of the Baphomets, you are absolutely 100% not concerned with tidy melodies or coherence or, dare I say, even resolution. In fact, I would say that the real magic of it all lies in the opposite of that, and that the true pleasure can be found in the crazy, wild, unresolved but choreographed chaos of a wine like the Disdit made by Anysbos. So our wine of the day is that white blend, which is made with fruit from the area of Bot Rivier or Bot River if you're feeling anglicized, and it is put together by the quietly formidable winemaker Marelise Niemann. And you might say, hang on, I know the name Marelise, and possibly you do, because you might have heard of her, first of all, from the fact that she was Tim Atkin's Young Winemaker of the Year, or perhaps you've heard of her because she is the genius behind the Memento range of wines. And really right now, it is really hard to find a range of wines that has such a small production but such a massive reputation for excellence on a global scale. Or perhaps you've just heard from her because her name is always popping up in Platter's list of 5-star wines, trophy winners, and best in category awards. Now, as I said earlier, the Anysbos farm sits in the region of Bot Rivier, which historically has been part of the larger Overberg region, but really stylistically it belongs in a very distinct little pocket of its own. Geographically, you have Elgin to the west, sitting up high in its little bowl on top of a mountain, and then further to the east, down the hill a little bit, you've got a famous region like Hemel and Arde. Now, both of the regions on either side have these really internationally renowned reputations for cultivars like Pinot Noir and Chardonnay and even Sauvignon Blanc, and yet Bot Rivier, sitting between these two, manages to fly under the radar a little bit. And you might say, well, obviously there's famous Elgin and there's famous Hemel and Arde, obviously it's going to be under the radar. And I suppose on the surface that makes sense, but the moment you dig a little bit deeper and look at the people who actually are making wine in Bot Rivier, then that idea goes out the window. For starters, you have Sebastian Beaumont from Beaumont Wines, which really is, he's one of the finest winemakers in the area in a whole range of different styles, from Mourvedre to white blends to Chenin Blanc. Then you've got Luddite, which is an absolute icon brand in the area and has been like that for over a decade. Then you've got Villon Wines, which make a fascinating Syrah Viognier co-fermented bottling. You, of course, have Gabriel's Kloof, which was put on the map by Peter Allen Finlayson, who also produces the globally acclaimed Crystallum range of wines. And that's without even touching on the farm of Anysbos. So if you think for even a second about any one of the wine labels that I've just mentioned, it becomes truly bizarre that Bot Rivier is not more of a thing. Anysbos Farm is, as a wine-making establishment, relatively young. It was bought in 2008 by Sue and Johan Haynes, and they planted their first bush vines in 2012, which they farm according to a dry land farming ethos. But it was really when Marelise Niemann left Gabriel's Kloof and came to Anysbos to become head winemaker there that things escalated very quickly indeed, to the point that by Platter 2025 Guide's release, they had their Tessama Red Blend winning the Wine of the Year, scoring 98 points from that Platter Guide. And in the same vintage, the Disdit White Blend earned itself 98 points from Christian Eads at Wine Mag. And really, currently, it is very, very difficult to find such a powerful twin attack of a red blend and a white blend from a single brand that could outdo something like Anysbos Disdit and Anysbos Wines. So again, when you think through the list of producers that I just mentioned and end with a brand like Anysbos and all of the accolades that they're collecting, it is kind of weird that Bot Rivier is still such an under-the-radar region. But I thought rather than me continue to over-intellectualize why this might be, I would just ask Marelise herself to share her thoughts on the matter.
I think BotRivier will always be the best kept secret that everybody shares. I mean, each producer here is really incredibly unique, and we don't necessarily share a sort of profile or style of wine, or sometimes not even the same vision. But I think that's also where the magic lies. I mean, the producers based here are super authentic, people with massive personality, strong personalities, and each of us just really doing what we think is best for our farms, for our soil types, for our region, for our families. And I don't think we have to always be in the spotlight. There's a place for people and regions that want to make a big show and a thing, and that's fantastic. And then there's also a place for a region like BotRivier where it's off the beaten track. You have to know where to find us to get here, to experience the wines and the people and the personalities. And I think that's, at this stage at least, where we find ourselves. I think it's our strength. I think that quiet weight and power that we can give in that way makes us unique. When we talk climate and soil types, we are so happy that we have the unique Bockerveld shale soils in almost, I think, 90% of the soils of Bot Rivier is Bockerveld shale. So drier region, half the rainfall if you compare it to Yemen and Arda and Algen. So we have to look at varietals that are water-wise, that can handle the heat stress. So that's why we have our Disdit blend, which is Chenin, Marsan, Rousson, Grenache Blanc. Very water-wise, very happy in this sort of dry, windy, warm conditions. Very well adapted to the Bockerveld shale. Completely different from Algen and Yemen and Arda. They are higher up, more rainfall, richer soil, so they plant different varietals.
So whether or not you buy her line that perhaps Bot Rivier will never be a well-known region because all the producers are so humble and refuse to market themselves or not, it's still worth getting into the glass to see what she's prepared for us. So when we finally get to give this beauty a sniff, well, I mean, it's immediately obvious that this is a class act. And I'll just start with the florals that burst out of the glass at you. And you have kind of frangipani notes, but then those are very quickly overtaken by the far more explosive citrus blossom elements. And while the florals might reach you first, that's not necessarily the core of it all, because underneath that, there's a slightly more sweet and savory mix of kind of bread dough, but not just any old bread dough. It's more like a subtly sweet brioche element, which really is phenomenal. So there's almost like a touch of honey, like it's a wildflower honey with a floral frangipani and the citrus blossom blend with that kind of buttered bread brioche hint. And then the longer you sniff on it, the more the fruit emerges out from between those notes. And you have beautiful, quite clear notes of kind of white nectarine and maybe even some orange, which tips over at times into a kind of orange barley candy and little pops of nutmeg. When we actually give this guy a sip, well, this is the difficulty that I was discussing earlier, is that one wants to immediately talk about coherence or tidiness, but actually it feels almost as if there are two wines taking their own different paths across my palate, and they just change and shift and morph all the time. For the sake of simplicity, just to help you track what I was talking about, on the aromas, I mentioned stone fruit, a little bit of nectarine and orange. And really, I guess maybe those define the two paths that this wine takes, because you have your sweeter, softer stone fruit, which is quite textured, kind of slightly chewy, but it's not bracing or bright or juicy. And on the other side, you've got this really clear cut, but also pithy, citrus, orange, mandarin type element, even a little bit of sherbet, I suppose, where you have on the one side weight of chewy stone fruit nectarine, and then the citrus is this bright, bitter, sweet, juicy kind of element that is constantly changing. And these two channels really just present themselves, not one after each other, but in parallel. It's wild. And then this evolution does generally quieten down a little bit, and I suppose integrate or come together as that citrus kind of softens into a more gentle, almost Chardonnay-like lime cordial, and the nectarine becomes a slightly more gentle, more generous peach element. They come together onto what is an enormously lengthy and textured tail. And just when you think everything is kind of drawing to a close, there's this amazing, very crystal clear snap of bitter, pithy, grapefruit, blood orange type citrus at the back there, which you definitely aren't expecting. And a lot of people say, whoa, this wine is completely different to anything else I've tasted. And that is mostly because, yes, while it is roughly 70% Chenin, this vintage is 69%, it's also got these amazing splashes of cultivars like Roussanne and Marsanne and Grenache Blanc, and they are woven together in an incredible way that renders this white wine familiar in a moment and then completely foreign the next. And really is that change and that journey that it takes you on that makes this wine not only critically lauded, but also undeniably Moorish. So while you pour yourself a second and third and possibly fourth glass, I'm going to leave you links to 2 more videos. One of them talks about Marelise Niemann's Memento wines, and the other one is a throwback to a far older video I made, but still fascinating. And that talks about Villon's Syrah, which is actually a Syrah Viognier co-fermented bottling, something that in itself is fairly interesting. So until next time, stay curious and always drink niche.